Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,000 likes on this one. It takes just a quick second, and it helps out so much. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I post content just like this as often as I can, and I'm always doing my best to make sure that this content is as good as it can possibly be. Tonight's video is also especially good. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, enjoy the video with no mid-roll ads, except for the ad break after this intro. There won't be any more after that one. And as always, I hope you all have a great night. I don't know that I believe in ghosts. When I offhandedly mentioned that Ruby's Antiques is haunted, most people conjure up ideas of ghouls and spirits and spectral echoes floating and fluttering through the narrow, crowded aisles. They think I'm talking about long-dead souls attached to objects they once owned, lingering in confusion or malevolence. But Ruby's Antiques isn't haunted by ghosts. At least, I wouldn't call the things that make a home here ghosts. Ruby's Antiques is haunted the way survivors of some horrific accident are haunted. Tragedy and terror soak the brocade, wallpaper and scuffed, varnish, sticky flooring, and settle over everything like a heavy layer of dust and cobwebs. Strange things have happened here as long as I've worked here, but never anything quite so awful as a few weeks ago. That particular day started as they always do. Being the only employee, I opened the shop with a brass key and a flip of the hand-painted placard hanging in the only window. The owner, an older woman I've met in person only once, Mrs. Rutledge, lets me set the hours I work, so the store opens anytime from sunrise to sunset, on most days of the week. The fact that the shop opens and closes according to my schedule should have given me pause when I met Mrs. Rutledge for the hiring interview. But desperate times, etc., etc. Immediately after opening the shop, before taking up the register, I migrated to our music selection. We have a seemingly infinite record collection. Yes, I've tried counting it, and I gave up after 3 days in a row of barely making a dent. And a pristine gramophone that softly creaks out its music over the entire shop. I chose one of my favorite records, from a collection that looks at least somewhat recognizable. I've found it's best practice not to stray too far from normal. Some of these songs can't be found anywhere else, and my musical selection's a big hit amongst my regulars. With a slight crackle, a honeyed voice underpinned by smooth brass instruments echoed out of the gramophone. Satisfied, I tucked a misbehaving tuft of hair behind my ear and took my seat behind the register, humming quietly along a song I'd never heard before. Familiar leather creaked under my weight, and the golden lamp on my desk flicked to life with a hum and a buzz, and my day officially began. The morning passed quietly. My first customers were a mother and her young son. Faces I'd never seen before. They ventured into the dreaded doll section and returned a half hour later with a pudgy porcelain doll that had too many teeth painted in its open, smiling mouth. The little boy looked absolutely delighted by his find. His mother, significantly less so. I pasted on my best customer service smile and processed the purchase swiftly and efficiently, so I could get that horrible doll away from me. I'd never seen it before. That's not uncommon in the doll section. They're always changing. Nobody showed up for a few hours after that. Closer to noon, one of my regulars hurried in, baseball cap slung low over his bloodshot eyes, flannel shirt smeared with grease and dust where it clung to his broad shoulders. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," I said, tracking his movement towards the back of the store. Mr. Callahan lifted his chin and stared at me. Even beneath the shadow of his cap, his eyes were dark and heavy and piercing, dull pinpricks in my skin. "How many times do I gotta tell you, kid? Just call me Cal." As far as I can tell, Everyone calls Mr. Callahan Cal. Everyone except me. I shrugged. Store policy. I told him truthfully, the way I always did when he complained about my formality. If you'd like to register a complaint, I can put you in contact with Mrs. Rutledge. No thanks. Don't need to get her involved. He hustled away very quickly after that. Shame. I liked talking to Mr. Callahan. Maybe a little more than I should, but that's neither here nor there. I ate lunch behind the register, a messy ham and cheese sandwich I'd slapped together that morning, groggy and half hungover from a boring night out, and sold a lovely set of earrings and a rickety chair to a couple unfamiliar customers. I was considering slipping out into the aisles to see what Mr. Callahan was up to when my phone buzzed on the desk. I flipped it over. Mrs. Rutledge's name glared up at me from the screen, along with a photo of twisting rose bushes I'd never set as her contact photo. Mrs. Rutledge, how may I help you? Oliver, sweetheart, Mrs. Rutledge rasped, her pack-an-hour voice like stones grinding together. A friend of mine is coming in to pick up a special order. You'll be there for him, won't you? Dread crept into my chest, cold and heavy. Of course, Mrs. Rutledge. She hacked an angry, tortured laugh that crackled through the phone. That a boy. Should be labeled with her name. Got it? Dial tone rang in my ear before I could ask whose name I was looking for. Tension shivered up my arms. All special orders were stored somewhere in the temperamental recesses of the basement, and I hated going down there. It was cold and damp one day, dry and dusty the next. The only consistency you could count on was the poorly spaced flickering lights and a faint, sour scent wafting up from the deeper within. With a heavy sigh, I propped up the small sign signaling I was in the back, and slipped into the shop's narrow aisles. I wasn't worried about people leaving without paying. If they wanted to steal from us, the consequences were on their heads, not mine. I trailed the outskirts of the shop first. Most days, the door to the basement could be found near the back of the shop, though that wasn't a guarantee. I climbed over and under a maze of interlocking furniture threatening to spill out of its designated section like an overgrown fungus, and made a mental note to reorganize our living and dining sets. I avoided the dreaded doll section like the plague it was. Mr. Callahan was near the back corner of the store, glancing between an array of shelves and what looked like an old, faded blueprint covered in nonsense, Escher-esque lines. I almost stumbled into his back when my foot caught on a plastic plant spilling out of its pot. Only quick reflexes and a sharp and extremely unprofessional bark of shit kept me from embarrassing myself. Mr. Callahan startled back, then hedged forward to steady me with a warm, broad hand on my shoulder. For a moment, my growing chill was chased away. Mr. Callahan, I smiled to hide my wince, my voice breaking in my throat. Sorry about that. He sighed, conspicuously. He rolled up his blueprints and half-tucked them behind his back. Not a problem, kid. I hadn't intended on coming across him, but Mr. Callahan knew these dark recesses of the shop almost better than I did myself. He's our most regular customer, though. I can't remember the last time I sold him anything. I maintained my customer service voice. Have you come across the basement today by any chance? For a moment, he was quiet. His eyes narrowed. He inspected me like I was a zoo animal performing some particularly odd behavior, and the back of my neck burned. Right there, he said, thumb jerking behind him. And so it was. Somehow I hadn't noticed it until he pointed it out. The basement doorway hung open as it always did, a delicate brass chain draped across at waist height, holding up a hand-painted employees only sign. A naked light bulb illuminated the narrow steps and old wooden paneling of the walls. Sickly yellow light spilled out at the bottom of the stairs, glistening off freshly waxed tiles that filled my throat with unease. Our basement wasn't usually so pristine. I approached the staircase, forcing myself to take slow, soothing breaths. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan." Carefully, I stepped over the chain and began to descend. I distantly heard Mr. Callahan grumbling, and the rustle of him unfurling his blueprints once more, but my head swam with the sound of buzzing incandescent lights, and the throbbing silence pulsing up from the basement. The soles of my shoes clicked softly on the tiled steps. Already the hot, sour tendrils of an unidentifiable scent drifted up and tickled my nose. I covered my mouth and nose with the sleeve of my sweater as I stepped out of the stairwell. A long, narrow hallway stretched out before me. Flickering yellow light warped my sight just slightly. The floor appeared to slope upwards, the ceiling dripping down, like the hallway was narrowing and tightening, threatening to swallow me whole before I reached the door at the end. I lifted my chin and strode up the hallway with purpose. It's best to not show hesitation. At the end of the hall, I unlocked the door with the same brass key I'd used to open the shop. The door swung open to a dimly lit storage room. Boxes sat stacked in haphazard piles. Cardboard boxes, wooden chests, metal tackle boxes, any kind of container with a semblance of hinge or lid, and a bare light bulb hung from a chain, swaying softly in the draft from the newly opened door. Odd geometric shadows stretched and swayed along the floor. I swallowed and tried not to stare too deeply into these shadows. Skittering sounds echoed in the heavy quiet. Rats, I could only hope. The noises crept closer before ebbing away. Nearer, farther, nearer, farther. I ignored the shiver crawling over my scalp and carefully approached the nearest stack of boxes. Each box in special storage was labeled in Mrs. Rutledge's loopy scrawl. Most were seemingly random numbers, some in Cyrillic or kanji scripts, and a handful were decorated with symbols I couldn't read or understand. Eventually I found a box labeled Celeste. It seemed right. The box was a small silver jewelry box, carved with intricate swirling designs and latched with a tiny padlock. The metal leached warmth from my skin when I picked it up and clutched it carefully against my chest. My knuckles ached from cold in seconds. I turned and my heart sank to my gut. The door had disappeared. I was sure I'd only ventured 10 feet or so into special storage. I was certain, but behind me stretched a long, cluttered room, filled to bursting with various boxes, and lit intermittently by dangling white light bulbs. My heart skipped. Sweat from my clammy palms smeared the delicate surface of the jewelry box. I closed my eyes. I inhaled until my chest ached and my throat burned with that sour smell, then exhaled until my head felt light and dizzy. When I opened my eyes, the door hadn't returned. In fact, had the room gotten narrower? I whispered, then bit the inside of my cheek. Mrs. Rutledge frowned on unprofessional language when I was on shift, no matter my surroundings. I tucked the silver jewelry box beneath one arm. Cold radiated from within, soaking through my sweater and the button-down I wore beneath, spreading through my ribs and leaving me shivering. With my free hand, I patted my back pocket for my phone. Nothing. I twisted and checked the other pocket. I felt around my front pockets, then patted both back pockets again, just in case. I could see it so clearly. My phone, discarded at the register after Mrs. Rutledge's cold call, pleasantly displaying the time and the background photo of the stray cat that lived around my apartment. Futile dread filled my chest, as cold as the jewelry box. I'd been trapped in the basement before, but never without my phone. I couldn't phone Mrs. Rutledge for instructions this time. Blinking shadows and dust from my eyes, I quickly glanced around the storage room. It was familiar and strange all at once, like someone had taken the special storage room I knew and just stretched it out into a long, narrow corridor, populated with the same stacks of strange boxes and the same dangling light bulb. "There's always a way out," I said softly, repeating words Mrs. Rutledge had said to me in these predicaments before. You only have to find it. Then I picked a direction and began walking. Writing this now, I don't know how long I spent walking the length of the special storage room. It seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how far I walked, how many piles of boxes I passed, the far wall never seemed to draw closer. I kept Celeste's jewelry box clutched to my chest. The chill helped cool the terrified heat building under my skin. The skittering came back, and it sounded louder, larger, closer. When a door finally appeared, tucked behind a stack of cardboard boxes taller than me, I could have wept. When I swung that door open and came face to face with the familiar aisles of Ruby's antiques, I'm not going to admit that my eyes burned with a few unshed tears. But I won't deny it either. Bright yellow sunlight blared through the shop's only window, distant and yet so soothing my legs nearly collapsed beneath me. Pleasantly cool air wicked away the sweat beating at the nape of my neck. I let out a long, heavy sigh, my tension and anxiety slipping away with my breath. Mr. Callahan was still in one of the obscure corners of the shop. I waved, but he didn't react, probably too absorbed in his work. Another customer stood in our jewelry aisle. Her back was hunched and her head down, so I didn't interrupt her search. The register greeted me with open arms. I collapsed into the soft leather of my chair, tipping my head back into the stripe of harsh sunlight pouring through the lone window. I placed Celeste's jewelry box atop the otherwise empty desk, wiping away a few foggy smears left by my clammy hands, sweeping with the sleeve of my sweater until the silvery surface gleamed, and settled in to wait for Mrs. Rutledge's friend to arrive and collect her special order. I decided I would close the shop as soon as she'd picked it up. My soft bed called my name in a siren's song. Eyes half-lidded, I basked in the silence and sunlight, the ache of tension slowly loosening within my stomach. I waited. Neither Mr. Callahan nor my other customer appeared at the register. I waited longer. The shop remained quiet and empty, the little bell over the door never ringing out to announce Celeste's arrival. I waited, and the chill crept into my knuckles and the tips of my fingers. Cold and poor circulation leached all warmth and color from my hands, leaving them stained a pale yellow from bloodlessness. I rubbed my hands together and cupped them in the sunlight pouring through the window, as though I could gather its warmth in the cradle of my palms. Warmth never came. If anything, my hands burned colder, joints stiffening up and the skin under my nails fading to a faint blue. Frowning, I brought my hands to my face. I puffed hot breaths onto the frigid skin in an attempt to warm them, and my breath clouded out in white wisps of steam. I paused, heartbeat skittering slightly as my teeth ached in the chill. It couldn't be below freezing inside the shop. We were in the middle of an unseasonably warm spring. The cold outside a harsh landscape of blue sky and green grass, and sun-baked cobblestone. And besides, our air conditioner was not nearly that powerful. I hadn't spent 3 summers broiling alive just for Ruby's antiques to become a winter wonderland in the middle of April. A shiver climbed my spine, rattling my teeth until I clenched my jaw tight and tucked my hands inside my sweater sleeves. The cold was growing bitter, almost damp, tinged with a sour scent of mildew, like it was wafting up from the basement. Maybe I hadn't closed the door when I'd come up. Fear surged in my throat. Upstairs, I didn't remember climbing any stairs. I couldn't remember how I'd gotten out of special storage. There was just a door, and then there was the shop. What the... I whispered, then flinched. That was my 3rd swear word, my 3rd infraction. Any moment, Mrs. Rutledge would be texting my phone to remind me of the shop's politeness policy. Except my phone was nowhere in sight. It wasn't in any of my pockets. I'd left it at the register, face up, displaying the grubby grin of Puddles the street cat. It was sitting helplessly, gormlessly in the shop, while I was somewhere that was decidedly not Ruby's Antiques. This was still the unpredictable basement, and that light shining in from the outside, the familiar face of Mr. Callahan and my other customer. My mouth tasted like ash. All at once I realized just how impossibly quiet the shop was. No music croaked out from an ancient gramophone. No metal and jewels clinked as the unknown customer rifled through trays and bins and boxes of jewelry. Silence hung heavy in the air. I felt eerily alone, and yet the hairs rising on the back of my neck reminded me that there were two other bodies inside the facsimile of the shop. Slowly, I turned my head in the direction I'd last seen Mr. Callahan. I couldn't see him anymore. My other customer had gone uncomfortably still while she bent over the necklace display. I could only glimpse the back of her head, and the gnarled curl of her hands around the wooden shelves and rice paper screens, sectioning off the aisles of the shop. But something about the way she stood, it just wasn't right. She was more like a pose mannequin than a person. In the harsh light streaming in from the shop's sole window, her skin seemed plasticky and slightly discolored. I moved silently, carefully, as I leaned in my seat for a better look. Long black hair streamed down from her unmoving back, gleaming with iridescent undertones like an oil slick. Leather creaked under my weight as I tipped another few inches forward. It echoed through the silence like a gunshot. My heartbeat skittered and skipped. Cold sweat pooled at the base of my spine, and in the crooks of my knees and elbows. I held my breath and swore I could hear my own pulse, a warm, wet pounding in the quiet. The customer with the long, oily hair began to move. It began as a twitch, a shudder, a small jitter of motion, accompanied by little plasticky pops and clicks, soft yet deafening. I sat perfectly still as her head tilted up, inch by agonizing inch. Fear spread through me like ice. I didn't know what would happen if she looked at me, if she noticed me, paid attention to me, but my nerves screamed at the idea. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be there. Please, move, I begged myself in my head, frantic thoughts buzzing and biting like a swarm of flies. My fingers clenched uselessly around the armrests of the chair. The woman's face finally turned to meet mine. I felt sick. Sick. My vision narrowed to her relentless stare, and my throat closed around a choked-off gasp. I don't think I'd been expecting her to look like a monster, or to have some ghoulish visage straight out of a horror movie. Like I said, Ruby's Antiques isn't haunted by ghosts, but I wasn't expecting her to look so imperfectly perfect. Her skin was pale and shiny and flawless. It gleamed in the harsh white light pouring in through the window. From the facsimile of the world outside that set my teeth on edge, her eyes were big and dark, her body narrow and elegant despite its twitchy movements. She was too sharp to look at, like an over-processed image. I fumbled for Celeste's jewelry box with clumsy hands, shoving up from my chair with enough force to send it scraping back into the wall behind me with a clatter of wood. The woman tipped her head to one side. Dark hair slipped over one shoulder, slow and liquid in its movements. She had all the features I'd expect on a human face. Those big eyes, a narrow nose, a wide-set mouth with pale lips. But it didn't seem right. Every tiny jitter or twitch, for just a second, her features looked painted on. She started creeping closer. Her limbs moved slowly and spidery. Soft click, click, click noises creeped out with every movement. I did not want her close to me. With the silver jewelry box hugged against my chest, the way a child clutches a teddy bear to keep them safe from monsters in the dark, I slipped away from the register and into the cramped aisles of not Ruby's Antiques. The door I'd come through was near the back left corner of the shop, nestled between clothing racks and esoteric board games. If I retraced my steps, I would find my way back. Relief bloomed in my chest when the door came into view. That relief crumbled into panic when I opened the door to a narrow, dark staircase, descending even deeper. "No," I said through clenched teeth. "No." I closed the door and opened it again. The staircase was narrower and darker, and the air drifting up from below carried the chilling bite of frost. Click, click, click. Fear shot into my throat. I looked over my shoulder to see a slick of oil-black hair spilling into the aisle in creaky, slippery movements. The woman's face followed, peeking out from behind a wooden cabinet piled high with chessboards. Her pale, spidery fingers curled around the corners of the cabinet. I'm secure enough in my lack of masculinity to admit the noise I let out was a fairly undignified squeak. I stumbled back, heel nearly catching on the edge of the uppermost step. Gravity swooped in my gut before I righted myself. A long moment passed. Another, stretching out like strands of syrup. The woman crept fully around the corner. I spun on my heel and launched myself down the stairs, 2 steps at a time. My footsteps echoed in the tiny tunnel of the stairwell. The only light came from a naked white light bulb, buzzing and flickering with each step like any vibration might knock the wires completely loose. The staircase was abnormally long, and ended in a plain wooden door, painted in rough strokes of white paint. I didn't have high expectations when I wrenched open that door, but my stomach still flipped with delirious nausea. Because not only was I staring into Ruby's antiques, but the woman was there, a foot or so closer than I'd last seen her. I whirled around and found a descending staircase behind me. Shiny tile floors gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. The air was so cold I couldn't feel my hand where it clutched Celeste's jewelry box to my chest. Panic had taken hold of me pretty thoroughly at that point. I barely wasted a second before bolting down those stairs. I could still hear the soft click, click, click of her moving, even as I stumbled off the last step and threw open the cold plastic door at the bottom of the stairs. There she was. Again, even closer, staggering forward with jerky start-stop footsteps. Around her stood Ruby's antiques, coated in a glimmering layer of plasticky vinyl. Terror and frustration rose in my throat, wet and hot like a sob. I slammed the door shut and skittered down yet another set of stairs behind me. I nearly dropped the jewelry box when I opened the rusted metal door and was met with wide, black plastic eyes, staring from the shiny sockets of the woman's too pale face. Every time I opened the door, she was closer, closer, closer. But what choice did I have but to keep going down these stairs and pray I'd eventually find my way back to some semblance of normalcy? I staggered back as she inched closer, but my irrational panic had failed to account for the sudden, descending staircase behind me. My heel slipped off the edge of the first step, and I barked a wordless shout as my balance dissolved and my stomach shot up into my throat. My flailing hand managed to grip the stair rail and slow my wild momentum. Instead of tipping backwards down the stairs and cracking my skull open, I went down in a grimace tumble of slipping feet and one grasping hand. I landed hard on my butt at the base of the stairs and smacked the back of my skull into what felt like a flimsy wooden door, and the world spun in swirls of black and gray. Blearily, I blinked the clouds from my eyes. I immediately regretted it. The woman had finally crossed the threshold and was creaking down the stairs. My blood turned to ice. Panicked, shaking, I felt for a door handle with my free hand, finding nothing but the smooth seams of a door fitting perfectly into its doorway. The stairwell was impossibly narrow. The woman, even slender as she was, couldn't descend without her slim shoulders brushing the smooth concrete walls. I had nowhere left to run. All I could do was watch, heart thudding painfully in my tightening throat. As the imperfectly perfect woman crept down the stairs with all the grace of a stop-motion doll. I tried to stand, using the door to prop me up, but my legs were shaking too hard to hold my weight. My lungs burned from cold as I gulped down panicked mouthfuls of air. The strange, doll-like woman approached until the toes of our shoes were touching. She crouched, and it looked wrong, her limbs bending slightly too far out of shape. Those big, glassy eyes were pinned on me, unblinking. She leaned closer, and the scent of her, metallic and sweet, like burnt sugar and melting plastic, invaded my nose and brought panicked tears to my eyes. In that moment, I remember my terror overflowing so much that I almost felt numb. I watched as her long, spidery fingers reached out, noticing the most useless details like the smooth, creaseless skin of her pale white palms. Her hand pressed against my chest. Her nails caught on the chunky knit of my sweater, just enough to fray the yarn. I'm not sure what I expected. Horrific scenarios swarmed my mind. Her white fingers digging beneath skin and bone and spurting fountains of blood. Her glassy black eyes swallowing me whole. That plasticky sheen climbing my own skin and swallowing me whole. When her hand delicately clasped the silver jewelry box and tugged it from my trembling grip, all my panic and terror briefly gave way to pure and utter confusion. She cradled the jewelry box in the bow of her arm, like a swaddled infant. Her slender fingers peeled back the handwritten label in Mrs. Rutledge's curly script, folded it daintily in half, and offered it back to me. I blinked. My voice felt caught behind the sob still in my throat. Eventually, through several embarrassing voice cracks, I managed to ask, "You're Celeste?" She didn't respond. I'm not entirely convinced that she could have, even if she wanted to. Her plasticky joints creaked as she stood. Click, click, click. And she turned and began climbing the stairs with the same shallow, jerky gait. I watched with my heartbeat hammering in my frigid fingertips as she disappeared through the doorway at the top, desperately trying to calm my frantic breathing. When my legs could support my weight, I stood and slid open the door at my back. It, somehow, led into the basement's narrow corridor. The moment I stepped through, the door slid shut, and was nothing but a perennially locked door once again. I wasted no time. I scrambled up the hallway and the glossy, tiled staircase, nearly tripping over the delicate chain at the top of the stairs when my ankle caught the "Employees Only" sign. Mr. Callahan gave me an odd look when I stumbled past him and clambered up and over a haphazard stack of dining chairs. But I had no mind to be embarrassed by my frantic, clumsy behavior. Warmth was beginning to chase away my chill, and crooning jazz echoed through the shop. But I had to be sure that I was back where I was meant to be. My phone sat exactly where I'd left it. When I tapped the screen, Puddles the street cat's gummy grin greeted me. Relief hit me like a truck. Wheezing from my retreating panic, and from the first bout of proper exercise I'd had in a week, shameful as that is to admit, I slumped into my plush leather seat and collapsed headfirst on the desk. The hollow thunk of my skull against wood was almost comforting. "You okay?" Mr. Callahan's gruff voice rattled from the base of my spine to the nape of my neck. "You look, I shot up, plastering a customer service smile on my face. Wayward, sweat-damp strands of flyaway hair stuck every which way, and I self-consciously smothered them down as best as I could without a mirror. "I'm fine, Mr. Callahan," I said chipperly, before leaping from my seat so fast even the unflappable Mr. Callahan jerked back. "But I regret to inform you that Ruby's Antiques will be closing soon. Very soon. Right now, in fact." He opened his mouth. Maybe it wasn't exactly polite to interrupt him, but I ached with the need to leave the shop behind for the day. Or the rest of the week. Possibly even the rest of April. Right now, if you have any purchases you need processed. I asked it futilely, knowing that Mr. Callahan never bought anything on his ventures into the shop. As expected, he shook his head. I stood on my toes to sweep my gaze across the shop, but I didn't notice any other customers, and they could find their own way out, were they so inclined. As I ushered Mr. Callahan out the door, into waning, reddish sunset, and the first true warmth I'd felt in hours, I clenched the 2 missed texts from Mrs. Rutledge on my phone. 2:26 p.m. Remember, impeccable customer service never involves foul language. 6:07 p.m. Great job, sweetie. Celeste is so happy with her order. You've gained yourself a repeat customer for sure. I didn't return to Ruby's Antiques for 6 days following the aforementioned events. I might have stayed away longer, but I only get paid for the hours the shop is open, and while this job pays exceptionally well for a customer service gig, I'm still not that well off. I haven't had another special order in the month or so since this happened, though, and every call or text from Mrs. Rutledge sends a fresh wave of frigid dread down my spine. Maybe I'll ask Mrs. Rutledge to hire another employee. Surely if I had an underling, I could send them down into the basement to collect special orders, or in the rare cases where we need to access the water and electric. When she hired me, she told me her shop doesn't take kindly to most strangers, that the antiques liked my vibe, whatever the hell that means. One more stranger couldn't hurt, could it? I suppose I won't know until I ask. I'm scared to go home. In fact, I don't think I will ever return. I don't care that everything I own is there, or even that it is my childhood home. I'm never going back. It was only a few months ago that I received the call that would change my life. I sat in my dorm studying for a psychology exam, when the monotone chirping of my phone broke through the tranquil silence. Hello? I answered blankly. Yes, am I speaking to Aaron? A thick, masculine voice broke through the speaker. Yeah, it is. Whom am I speaking to? Well, ma'am, I am Sheriff Watterson from back in Centerville. Your father is Roger, correct? My voice cracked as I whispered. Yes, is everything okay? A heavy, pained sigh came through the phone. Dad's funeral was harder than Mom's. Mom's was a long time coming. The cancer had pillaged her body for years. It laughed with glee as it poisoned her blood, and left her a hollow husk months before her final breath. But Dad had drowned. Not in a lake, not in a pool, in his own home. They told me he fell asleep in the bathtub. 3 days after the sheriff's call, I stood in the small, traditional Wesleyan chapel. As I stood in front of the simple casket, wrapped in a black dress, I realized I was now an orphan. Later that evening, Dad's lawyer sat me down to walk me through the last will and testament. I sat there on the couch in a grief-induced shock. The legal jargon spouted from lawyer overwhelmed me like a flood. Very few of his words reached my mind, but one of his final statements broke through my stupor. And finally, your father has left you the entirety of his estate, including the house. Wait, what did you say? I asked the dry lawyer. Your father left you the house, as well as the majority of his earthly possessions. He replied as if it was the most mundane statement ever. Oh, was all I could muster. Also, your father left you this, he said as he handed me a small, simple envelope that bore my name. Thanks, I said as I stuffed it into my purse. Days passed filled with casseroles, hugs, and sloppy signatures on legal documents. Several members of the family advised that I sell the house to pay for my schooling. But how could I? How could I sell the first and only home my parents ever bought? How could I sell the home that held my childhood? Instead, I kept it. I transferred to an online program, and before long I found myself moving the few boxes from my dorm into the house that was now mine. A few short weeks later, I found myself alone in the house for the first time since Dad died. No one tells you how loud it is after the funeral, nor how quiet it is after everyone leaves. The silence brought to mind every good memory of my dad, though they were tainted by loss. There would be no new memories shared, no happy hugs as I graduated college, no tearful laughter as he walked me down the aisles. I had every memory of my dad that I would ever have, and as I grew older, they would fade, eventually disappearing together. Then my dad would truly be gone. As gentle tears ran down my cheeks, a memory of a note hidden in my purse came to mind. Grabbing my purse, I fished out the letter that bore my name in my father's shaky yet elegant handwriting. A single tear dampened the envelope as I gently opened the letter. My heart awaited eagerly for the wisdom it may contain, yet to my surprise, it only had one single sentence. Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand. I don't know how long I stared at the lone sentence, but as I did, anger boiled up within me. And before long I screamed, "That's it? That's the best advice you could think of? Gee, thanks, Dad. I'll always be hydrated at night. What about I love you, or I'm proud of you?" I screamed at an empty house as I slid to the ground and wept. Why did you have to go? Why did you leave me? That night I got drunk. A cocktail of anger and grief fueled my drive to the local liquor, where I bought enough boozes to supply any frat house for a week. After several bouts with Jack Daniels, I finally collapsed on my bed in a drunken stupor. It was around 3 a.m. when I coughed and gagged myself awake. It felt like my lungs were full of water. I sat up quickly, fearful that I was choking on my own vomit, but as I lurched upward, the feeling passed. My airway opened, and I greedily sucked in as much air as I could. My hands shook uncontrollably. As I tried to calm down, standing up, I walked into the master bathroom and bent to the sink to splash some cold water on my face. Glancing up, I saw my sorry reflection in the mirror, and for a moment in the reflection, I saw movement. It was slight, but there in the reflection of the gaping darkness that was the doorway to my room was movement. The kind of movement your eyes notice a second too late. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the implications reached me. Slowly I turned and faced the dark void that used to be my bedroom. Armed with only a hairbrush, I cautiously entered the room. "Hello?" I said, trying to disguise the fear in my voice. "Is someone there?" The room was empty. No one was there, and I soon turned my attention to the door to the hallway. Peeking my head into the hole, I looked down both ways, and as I did, from behind me I heard the gentle trickle of water. My journey back to the bathroom felt like it took hours. I kept expecting something to touch me from the dark, but soon I stood fully in the low white light of the bathroom. Before me was the sink. A thin stream of water flowed from the faucet. My mind offered dozens of explanations, but the one I settled on was that in my fear I failed to fully turn off the faucet and didn't notice until my terror had passed. "It's nothing, just the alcohol," I whispered aloud to myself as I locked the bedroom door and returned to bed. The next morning I awoke in a strange mix of groggy exhaustion and quiet hope. I found myself somewhat embarrassed about the night before, both the drinking and the fear, and though I was still grieving, I told myself I wasn't going to be controlled by the loss anymore. That morning I started to unpack and clean. The work was good for me. It kept my mind from dwelling on the loss. Soon I started back on my studies, which brought me some enjoyment. For the first time in days, I felt hungry. So I walked a few blocks down to the pizza place, the same one I worked at in high school. Billy, the owner, greeted me warmly with a hug as he told me how sorry he was for my loss. "Thanks, Billy. That means a lot," I replied. "We love you, kiddo, and you always got a job here if you want it." I smiled. "If you're serious, yeah, that would actually be great. I could really use a distraction right now. He nodded. Start whenever you're ready. We'll take you any time. How's tomorrow sound? He patted my back. Tomorrow is great. A few moments later, my large pepperoni pizza was ready. As Billy handed it to me, he said, "On the house, kiddo. It's the least we could do." I thanked him and carried my dinner back home. I wish I could say that night was normal. What I thought was just a drunken reaction to grief turned out to be something greater. Every night that week, at 3 a.m. I awoke feeling like I was drowning. Every night the feeling grew more intense, and lasted longer than the night before. After a full week of restless sleep, I couldn't take it anymore. Not knowing what else to do, I emailed one of my professors and asked if we could schedule a video call. Dr. Martin was one of my favorite professors. He warmly encouraged my desires to become a psychologist, and after some small talk, I opened up to him. I told him about my father's death, how he had drowned. I told him about my nightmares and the terror I felt as my lungs filled with imaginary water. All the while, he listened attentively. As my account came to an end, Dr. Martin stared intently into the camera, clearly deep in thought. A moment later, he spoke. "Honestly, Aaron, it sounds a lot like grief-triggered sleep paralysis." "Sleep paralysis?" I echoed. "Yes, it seems to be that your subconscious has taken this grief and internalized it in the form of a paralysis experience that mimics the final moments of your father." I stared for a moment as the news sunk in. "Well, is there anything that would help?" I asked. "Well, if you're wanting to go the medication route, I'd have to refer you to someone. But if you'd ask me, medication might not be necessary. Perhaps all your mind needs is some form of closure." I thought for a moment, before nodding. "Thank you, doctor. You've been really helpful." "Of course, Aaron. Happy to help." Closing my laptop, I sat there at the end of my bed, trying my best to digest what I had just been told. What would closure even look like? Moments later, it hit me. The note. The stupid one-sentence note my dad had left me. The note that was currently hiding in the back of my junk drawer. Soon I found myself staring at the wrinkled piece of paper. All it said was, "Always keep a glass of water on the nightstand." Why would he write this? The thought bounced around my mind over and over again, but ultimately it doesn't matter. If listening to the note would give my mind closure, I'd do whatever it said. That night before bed, I set a tall glass of clear water on my nightstand. I stared at the cup as my eyelids grew heavy, and soon I was fast asleep. I woke in the morning shocked. Not only had I slept all the way through the night, but it was some of the most restful sleep I'd ever had. I felt relaxed and energized, ready for the day ahead. My smile rarely left my face all day. Later that afternoon, Billy remarked, "You're in a good mood today, Aaron. Glad to see it." I chuckled slightly. Yeah, it finally feels like I can move on with my life. He smiled and nodded as we got back to work. That night, I dumped out the glass and filled it to the brim with fresh water. Hopping into bed, I silently hoped that night would be just as good as the night before. Again, morning came, and with it the renewed energy of a restful night. I woke with a smile on my face, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something was different. It was the glass. It was half full. I stared at it for a moment. I vividly remember filling it full last night, but now it wasn't full. It took a moment to convince myself that I had just taken a drink in the middle of the night and simply didn't remember. Weird, I said aloud as I forced a shrug. Despite my efforts, a feeling of unease stuck to me all day. The day itself was a blur. I couldn't tell you one thing about that day, only that I spent every moment of it wondering what happened to the water. Again, evening came, and I found myself filling the same glass with fresh water. As I set it on the nightstand, I took a moment to note the exact amount of water that the glass held. It took longer to fall asleep that night, but eventually sleep took me. Again, I awoke refreshed and happy, but it lasted only a moment as I looked to the nightstand and saw that the glass was a little more than half full. Definitely less than the night before. That day, my mind was consumed by one thing: the water. Did I drink it and I just don't remember? I must have. But why don't I remember? Where else could the water have gone? Everything okay, kiddo? Billy's voice broke through my questions. Oh, yeah, sorry. Just a lot on my mind. Well, if you need to talk about anything, just say so. I nodded as I tried to distract myself with work. That night I had an idea. After filling the glass, I took a red marker and marked the water line. In the morning, there would be no doubt about how much water I had put in. The next morning, the glass was completely empty. In a fit of anger and fear, I threw the glass across the room. It shattered as it hit the wall. What the hell is going on? I screamed at the empty house. That afternoon, as I walked to work, I realized that before I overreacted, I needed to be sure that I wasn't drinking the water. For all I knew, I could have been sleepwalking. If I could see that I was drinking the water, that would put an end to it. I knew my phone wouldn't record all night, and I didn't have time today to drive to the city over and purchase the security camera. So if I couldn't record video, maybe I could record audio. I often used a voice memo app to record college lectures to help with studying, and I knew that there wasn't a limit to how long the app would record. By the time I walked into the pizza parlor, I had already decided. Tonight, I would record everything. As night fell, I made another decision. I decided to fill 4 glasses instead of just 1. If it turned out that it was just me guzzling water while sleepwalking, 4 glasses of water would certainly cause me to have to use the bathroom, and the discomfort would wake me. And so, with 4 glasses of water on the nightstand, and my phone recording every noise in the room, it didn't take long for me to fall asleep. As consciousness returned in the morning, I quickly turned to the nightstand, and a cold chill ran through my body as I saw 4 empty glasses. With a sweaty hand, I picked up my phone and began to play back the 8-hour recording. The first few hours, no sound other than my light snoring was heard. I sped up the playback even more, till around 3 a.m., when suddenly a new sound came across the phone. It was a startling sound, the type of sound only heavy inhaling of water can create. It sounded like a thirsty horse was violently lapping water from a drinking trough. It lasted about 30 seconds, and as quickly as it came, it was gone. The rest of the recording was just my snoring. I was horrified. That couldn't have been me. I couldn't have made those sounds. But I dared not consider the other option, the option that said something else was drinking the water. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no other breathing, nothing, just the unhuman lapping of water. I had no other choice. Hearing wasn't enough. I needed to see what was going on. I called Billy and called off my shift that afternoon. I told him I was sick. He wished me a quick recovery. Not long after, I hopped into my car and headed out to buy a camera. Centerville wasn't big enough to have any stores that sold the type of camera I needed. The nearest store that did was 45 minutes away. I walked into the store and quickly found the tech section. The young man behind the help desk looked up as I approached. With a grin, he said, "Hi, can I help you?" Yeah, you can." I quickly replied, "I'm looking for a home security camera that has night vision and I can access from my phone." "Sure, we got a few options over there if you want to follow me." Out of the 4 options, I chose the cheapest. "That's a good model," he said. "The camera app will work as long as your phone has Wi-Fi." "Great," I replied. After the employee walked me through the setup progression and user functions, I returned to my car and headed home. As my father's house came into view, I was startled by how foreign it felt to me. It was no longer the home that protected me as a child. It was no longer the home that filled my mind with good memories and peace. Instead, it was some twisted version of that place. I wanted to leave and never come back. I really did. It was the house that killed my father. But if I left, then Dad was really gone. As I entered, I felt nothing. No love, no nostalgia, no comfort. Only fear. I set up the camera as quickly as I could. I couldn't stand being in the bedroom anymore. The only thing that kept me going was the desire to know the truth. After setting up the camera and ensuring it was connected to my phone, I walked down to the local pharmacy. I walked into the small, dusty place illuminated by dim fluorescent lights that emitted a flittering green glow. It didn't take long to find the sleeping pills that I was looking for. I doubted I could have fallen asleep on my own that night. Some help would be nice. A frail old man stood behind the counter and offered me a gummy grin as I walked up. "Hello, young lady. Find everything you need?" "Yes, sir. Thank you." He looked at the pills as he put them in a small bag. "Trouble sleeping, ma'am?" With a nod, I said, "Yeah, I guess you could say that." "Well, hopefully these will help. Take care now." "You too," I said as I walked out. Night fell. With shaking hands, I filled a glass to the brim with water, checked one more time that the camera was working and facing both the bed and nightstand, and took 2 pills. My heart beat fast as I climbed into bed, and with a sigh, I turned off the lamp. Morning came, and I can honestly say it was the best night of sleep I've ever had. With a stretch and a yawn, I rose from the bed, happy and ready for the day. But it took only one glance at the empty cup for all the fear and dread to fall back onto my shoulders. I didn't even bother to change out of my pajamas, as I grabbed my phone and walked out onto the porch. After connecting to the camera, I saw my room at 11:30 the night before. The camera's infrared illuminated my room with an eerie white and gray glow. I watched myself sleep at 3 times speed, and between 11:30 p.m. and 3 a.m., nothing happened. The room was quiet and peaceful, but what I saw at 3:01 took the breath right out of my lungs. From beneath my bed crawled a form as quietly and smoothly as fog sliding over mountaintops. It was impossibly tall. When it finally stood, it had to bend over. Its head and shoulders rested against the ceiling. Its back, which faced the camera, was damp and disgustingly thin. Every vertebrae of its spine was visible. Its arms reached below its knees. It didn't move like a predator in a hurry. It moved like something that already owned the room. The thing slowly reached for the glass of water, which looked tiny in its massive hands. It raised the cup to its lips and loudly sucked the water down, and after it finished, its neck turned its head to me as I slept peacefully in my bed. As it stared at me sleeping, it raised a hand and gently ran its fingers through my hair and eventually down the side of my face, where one of its claws pressed against my cheek hard enough to break the skin. At this, I began to stir. I mumbled for a moment, then my sleeping mouth spoke the words. "Dad, is that you?" The creature stared at me, then its body shook with wet, choking laughter. And then with a creaked, unhuman voice, it replied mockingly, "Yes, it's me." "I missed you so much, Dad." It then bent over and kissed my forehead, before silently slinking back under the bed. I couldn't breathe. My stomach churned as I stumbled off the porch and into the yard. I couldn't make myself look back at the house. I just wanted to get away, to put as many miles between me and that thing as possible. So I got in my car and drove. I'm hours away now, writing this from a hotel room in another state. I'm never going back. I think it knows I left. I've been watching the camera feed, and 30 minutes ago, it crawled out from under the bed. Since then, it hasn't moved. Its eyes have been locked on the camera the entire time. They're horrible eyes, pure black with tiny white pupils. It hasn't blinked once. It's getting late now. I don't want to go to sleep. I'm afraid I'll drown. I'm not writing this so anyone will pity me, or to make people feel sorry for me, or to hear that I somehow deserved what happened. I'm writing this so others can see how far things can spiral if you're someone like me. Everything started 5 years ago. The perfect example of cause and effect, how one single moment can trigger a landslide. Nora and I had been married for 16 years. We'd had our rough patches, and yes, I'll admit it openly, sometimes I was hard to live with. Stubborn, careless, and always taking her for granted. I thought Nora would never leave me, that she wouldn't even know what to do without me. But after the kids were born, everything became unpredictable. We had 3 children together. Jack, our oldest boy, 14 years old, Luna, 8, and Samantha, just a year and a half. That night, the night everything went to hell, we had a horrible fight. I'd been drinking, stopped at a bar on the way home. Nora snapped at me, and that was all it took. She never acted like that, but when she started yelling, something inside me broke loose. I lost it. I slapped her. Yeah, I know. I'm a piece of crap. There's no excuse. Because of that, Nora packed up right then and there, still in the middle of the night, and stormed out. She took all 3 kids with her. I just kept yelling, so blinded by anger, I barely even noticed that my family was leaving for the last time. God, if I could go back. If I hadn't been such an idiot. According to the police, Nora lost control of the car. She drifted into the oncoming lane, and then she hit a truck head-on. Nora and Jack didn't survive. Luna was in awful condition and had to be rushed to the hospital. Same as Samantha. And me? I was at home, drunk and raging, not knowing a thing. After that, I fell hard. I won't go into every detail, but I regret everything I did, every ounce of suffering I caused. Luna survived, but her spine was so badly damaged, she'll never walk again. Samantha, by some miracle, was the only one who escaped without serious injury. And me? I kept drinking. Every day. I was drunk morning to night. That was my escape, my way of hiding from what I'd done. Because no matter what anyone says, I caused their deaths. It was my fault. They took Luna and Samantha away from me. I was furious, like some deranged animal, but the booze had rotted my brain by then. Now I know they were better off. Nora's sister took them in, a good family. They cared for each other. They could give Luna the kind of support I never could. And I had no one left. Except for Snail, the dog. Snail was the only thing that stayed with me through those years. A 2-year-old Weimaraner. A sweet little boy the kids had named together. One of my last pathetic attempts to hold the family together. But even he couldn't stop me from tumbling down the cliff I'd created for myself. I overdosed on pills one night, hoping I'd never wake up again, thinking the only justice left would have been if I had taken Nora's place in that car. I survived. But why me? Why the hell did I survive that night, and not Nora and Jack? They took me to the hospital and I stayed there for a long time. Therapy, rehab, group sessions, all the things they give someone who's fallen straight to the bottom of the pit. And somehow I managed to climb up a little. When I finally got out, I tried to set things right. I even went to see my girls. It took me 2, maybe 3 years before I could even force myself to look them in the eyes. Luna was 12 by then, a young lady, and she didn't speak to me. Not a word. She wouldn't even look in my direction. Samantha, she was just a little girl, but she didn't know who I was anymore. She stared at me like I was a stranger on a bus, and honestly, I deserved that. I couldn't be angry at them. I was the reason their lives had been shattered. So I stopped visiting. It wasn't just painful for me, it hurt them to see me. And just like that, I was alone again. But at least I had quit drinking. I needed something new, something to keep my hands and my mind busy. That's when I turned to hunting. It wasn't unfamiliar. When my dad was still alive, he used to take me out into the woods with him all the time. I learned how to handle myself out there, and I still had his rifle, my inheritance. For a full year, I went out to the nearby woods almost every single day. It felt good, calming even. Out there in the quiet, I finally had space to think about everything, about the things I'd ruined, the things I'd lost. And Snail always came with me, my loyal companion. At least it wasn't just me getting out of that empty house for once. He did too. Over time, he became my closest friend, the one soul who stayed beside me during the worst moments of my life. And maybe he carried some small piece of the family I'd once had. So we walked the forest every day, sometimes after work for an hour or two. Sometimes I spent an entire weekend out there with him. That Friday was no different. I was sitting against a fallen tree, rifle in my lap, a young buck through the scope, maybe 650 feet away. Snail, though never trained as a hunting dog, had somehow learned exactly when to stay silent, blending his gray coat into the brush like he'd been born to do it. I aimed at the lower cervical vertebrae of the deer. It would have been a perfect shot, one of those clean textbook kills. But I didn't pull the trigger. My finger was there, resting on it. One tiny movement, and it would have been done. I'd been going out there for a year, and I had never killed a single thing. I carried the rifle like it was part of me, but I never fired it. Deer, boar, foxes. I'd had them all in my sights at one point or another, but something inside me, my mind, my soul, whatever, refused to let me squeeze the trigger. It was better this way. I didn't want to bring any more harm into this world. The buck lifted its head, then bolted away in an instant. I lowered my rifle calmly, same as always. It almost relaxed me to watch the animal run free like that. Snail burst out of the bushes, his gray body shaking with excitement. His tail wagged as if he understood, as if he too was happy we let the deer go. "Good boy, Snail," I said, rubbing the top of his wet gray head. "Come on, let's keep moving." But as I took a step forward, Snail snapped his head up, like he'd heard something he'd never heard before. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, frowning down at him. Then I heard it too. A voice, far away, somewhere deep in the woods. Someone crying, someone screaming for help. For a second, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a cougar, maybe a fox mimicking a cry. But the voice sharpened, growing clearer and more desperate, and there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there. Someone in real trouble. "Go, Snail. Find it," I urged, and he shot forward immediately. The cries grew louder. We crashed through the woods together, branches slapping against my arms as I gripped the rifle tight, terrified I'd drop it. Snail, in his usual clever way, found the easiest paths between the trees. The woman's voice, it was definitely a woman, kept crying, wailing, begging. Then we broke through the line of trees into a small clearing, and for a second I thought I was hallucinating. A woman was kneeling in the grass, wearing nothing but a white bathrobe. For a moment a memory slammed into me. Nora. But it couldn't be her. Nora was dead. For a moment I was just weak. The world seemed to freeze around me. It wasn't Nora. Of course it wasn't. Nora had been tall, with long, straight, dark brown hair. This woman had short black hair. Her face was buried in her hands as she sobbed, like a lost child. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I asked once I snapped out of my initial shock. "Help me, please," she said without lifting her head, without moving an inch. "I'll help you," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What happened? Are you hurt?" But she just kept crying. Deep, raw, hopeless sobs. I stepped closer, gripping my rifle as if it were the only thing holding me upright. Snail didn't move. He stood at the edge of the clearing, stiff, confused, like he didn't understand what was happening at all. "What happened?" I asked again. "Should I call an ambulance?" "Help me," she sobbed again, the same broken tone. I took another cautious step, staring at the ring of stones arranged around her, a perfect, deliberate circle of small rocks. What the hell is this place? I'd walked these woods for years. I had never seen this clearing before. "Ma'am, what happened?" I asked, finally reaching out and placing a hand on her shoulder. The feeling of her skin, or whatever it was, made my stomach drop. It wasn't soft. It felt hard, wrong. Then everything happened at once. A flush, or maybe just my brain snapping, and Snail started barking like he'd lost his mind. I looked at him in confusion. Why was he growling at us? And then the woman lifted her head. Or rather, she lifted what should have been her head. She didn't have a face, not even a distorted one, just a wet, bloody mass where her features should have been. I screamed and fell backwards into the dirt. Her white robe dropped from her body. Her bare skin began to stretch upward, unnaturally long. Her arms twisted and cracked, bending backward, splitting open. More limb-like stumps burst from her torso, writhing like they were searching for something to grab. Her entire body darkened, the skin turning into some chitinous, segmented armor. She shrieked, not like a human, but like metal scraping against bone, thrashing until she finally transformed into something out of a nightmare. A 4-meter-long centipede horror, glistening in the light that suddenly vanished. As if someone flipped a switch, the sun blinked out, and the sky above us bled into a deep, violent red. In the dull red glow, Snail leapt in front of me like some ghostly guardian, planting himself between me and the grotesque centipede thing. He barked and snarled, his whole body rigid with terror and defiance. The creature shrieked in response, a piercing metallic scream, and its long body writhed like a pine tree whipping in a storm. I couldn't move. I just stared, frozen, at the shimmering plates of its chitin armor, catching the red light. Then it struck. Its massive mandibles slammed into the ground where Snail had been a second before, the impact shaking the earth beneath me, and in that moment, a single thought carved itself into my mind. If I don't act now, I'll lose the last thing I have left in this world. Instinct took over. I shoved Snail as hard as I could, sending him tumbling across the dirt. The creature's jaws tore into the soil where he'd just been. "Run!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Go, Snail, run!" I snatched up my rifle and aimed at the monstrous thing. It lifted the front of its body, rising like a cobra, its head towering above us as it watched. My hands trembled on the trigger, but I didn't hesitate. The gunshot cracked through the red-tinted forest. The bullet hit. I heard it, a sharp metallic clink. But the creature didn't even flinch. It didn't bleed, didn't stagger, didn't react at all. My blood went cold. There was only one option left. Flee. I grabbed Snail by the collar and yanked him forward, giving him one last push. He barked wildly at the abomination, refusing to leave me, but finally, blessedly, he turned and bolted toward the trees. I ran after him as fast as my legs could carry me. We ran into the forest as fast as my legs could move. Under that blood-red sky, Snail's gray coat was almost impossible to track. Within seconds, I lost sight of him. "Snail?" I shouted into the glowing crimson woods. "Where are you?" But it was like screaming into a void. The pines looked wrong under the red light, warped, twisted, and the nightmare only grew worse. I stopped for just a second, grasping for air. I couldn't hear Snail barking anywhere. Nothing but my own ragged breathing and the distant, pulsing roar of the red sky. "Snail?" I screamed again, my voice breaking. "Where are you?" A crack of splintering wood snapped me out of it. Something huge was approaching. Fast. It plowed through the trees like a bulldozer, snapping branches and tearing through undergrowth. I could hear its hundreds of legs clicking across the forest floor like a hailstorm. I ran again. I didn't even know which direction. Just deeper, anywhere, gripping my father's rifle like a lifeline. The dark red sky lit everything in an unnatural glow, and only then did I realize the cold sting against my skin. It was raining. But the rain looked black under the light, pouring down in freezing sheets, soaking me in seconds. I kept running, stumbling, glancing back every few steps to see if the creature was on my heels. It was. Always. "Snail?" I gasped again, barely able to breathe. I leaned against a pine tree, completely drenched. Where the hell was I? What was this twisted world? I tried to gather what strength I had left, scanning the forest, looking for any sign of movement, any hint of where the creature was coming from. But what I saw instead was worse. Between the trees, figures, still black silhouettes watching me, not moving, not breathing, just staring. When I focused on them, they slipped behind the trees. But they were still there. I could feel them watching, judging, as if they knew every sin I'd ever committed. My body trembled. My mouth went dry. "Snail!" I screamed, using the last of my voice. The bushes rustled behind me. I spun around, raising the rifle, refusing to loosen my grip. And then, a bark. A familiar bark. A soaked gray shape burst through the foliage. In the red glow, Snail looked almost ghost-like. But he was real, thank God. He was real, and seeing him there was the most comforting sight of my miserable life. I hugged Snail harder than I ever had before. I could feel him trembling. His confusion was obvious. He didn't know where we were, didn't recognize a single scent, a single landmark. No wonder he hadn't found me sooner. "Come on, Snail," I whispered, stroking his soaked fur. "We have to move before that thing finds us." I glanced back toward the forest. The shadow figures were gone. Maybe Snail had scared them off. God knows I hoped so. I slung the rifle over my shoulder and moved forward, fast but not running. Snail padded at my side, sticking close. I had no idea where we were heading, but the forest felt endless, a red, twisted labyrinth with no exit. We reached a slope and I slowed down, carefully trying to make my way down the hillside. That's when I felt it, even through the thick soles of my boots. The ground trembled, hundreds of legs hitting the earth at once. I snapped my head back, just in time to see a pine tree rip straight out of the soil and topple over. The creature was coming. "Run!" I shouted again. "Snail, go!" But this time, the creature wasn't just chasing. It was furious. In the blink of an eye, it was there. The trees beside me exploded into splinters as its massive mandibles slammed into it. Chips of wood blasted in every direction. I stumbled, trying not to tumble down the slope, and then Snail's barks. Wild, desperate, furious. "Snail, where are you?" I shouted, scrambling. He was close. I saw him. My brave, idiot dog was attacking the monster, throwing himself at its legs without fear, snapping and biting with everything he had. "No, no, no!" I screamed. "Snail, come here! Run!" But Snail had latched on, shaking his head violently, tearing at one of the creature's limbs. I couldn't leave him to fight alone. I spun back around, ripped the rifle from my shoulder, and aimed again. The black rain was pouring harder now. It stung my eyes, ran down my face, soaked my hands, making everything slippery. I fired. A perfect headshot. This time it connected. I heard the crack as the bullet smashed into one of the creature's churning mandibles. It screamed, a horrible, high-pitched metallic shriek, lifting the front of its body high and thrashing in agony. But I didn't expect what happened next. The rain, the mud, The creature's massive weight shifted the hillside, and the whole slope gave way. The soil slid out from underneath it, and the monster tumbled down the hill, crashing between the trees and disappearing into the forest below. It was gone. I might have actually beaten it, but something was wrong. The last time I'd seen Snail, he was still attached to that thing. Where was he now? I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, stumbling, slipping, clawing at branches, doing anything I could to reach where the creature had fallen. Trees lay toppled and crushed under its weight as it slid down the soaked hillside, but no matter how hard I pushed myself, it felt like I never got any closer. I fell hard, face first into the mud. Then I crawled, dragged myself forward, clung to every exposed root and jagged rock, like a desperate animal trying to pull itself from a pit. "Snail!" I screamed, my voice shredding in my throat. No answer. The rain only grew heavier, hammering down on me. The sky burned deeper and deeper red, pulsing like some living wound in the heavens. I forced myself upright, mud dripping from my face. Something flickered between the trees below. A shape, a shadow. I couldn't tell. "Snail?" I yelled again, whistling as loud as I could. Still nothing. I bolted forward once more. My father's rifle weighed me down, so I threw it into the mud, not caring where it landed. I grabbed at branches, trying to keep my footing, but my foot slid on the soaked earth and I collapsed again, slamming my body into the ground like a helpless ragdoll. As my face hit the mud, I heard it. A bark. A single, sharp bark. Snail. It had to be Snail. I scrambled to my feet, and the world changed. Completely. The sky was blue, bright, clear, untouched. The trees stood tall and familiar, exactly as they had been before the nightmare began. And I was on my knees in the mud, soaked, shaking, gasping for breath. My head pounded. My heart hammered like it wanted to burst out of my chest. I could feel my blood racing with panic and exhaustion. "Snail!" I screamed again, voice cracking as it tore its way out of me. I didn't find anything. I spent days out there in those woods. Days. No tracks, no sound, no traces of what had happened, like the whole nightmare had never existed. But Snail was gone, and so was my father's rifle. Both of them left behind in that thing's world. The only intact piece of my old life, the little dog my girls had named, had vanished without a single sign. But I knew he was alive, somewhere in that red place. I could feel it. Snail was still out there, still fighting, still waiting. When I finally went home, I gathered everything I had left. Supplies, maps, anything that might help. That afternoon, I bought a new rifle. I'm going back, and if anyone reads this, know that I'm out there in the forest, searching as long as my legs will carry me. I'm bringing my dog home, even if I have to walk straight into hell to do it. I won't let him be lost too. The call came in after we had already gone to bed for the night. Our station's blaring loudspeaker alarm forced me to rocket out of a state of half-slumber and sit up in my bunk. The words, "fire response," came over the same loudspeaker as I looked at the alert on my phone, and saw that only about 30 minutes had passed since I had closed my eyes. My phone read, "Forcible entry, victim trapped inside of building," followed by an address that I didn't think anything of at the time. I wasn't terribly tired. I never really drifted into a deep sleep while doing overnights at the firehouse, and so I was able to step out of my bunk and quickly make my way to the gear room without having to shake off too much grogginess along the way. It was a cold night in the dead of winter, but my usual bunk room always feels like it's about 100 degrees in there, so I had gone to bed that night in my usual attire of black gym shorts and a gray t-shirt. The gear room, on the other hand, tends to mimic the outside temperature, with near-perfect accuracy, so I mentally prepared myself to step out into the frigid winter air in what was barely more than a pair of skivvies. The cold hit me hard, and I couldn't prevent myself from shivering as I walked past Osgood and Fuller, who already had their turnout pants on, and were busy pulling their suspenders over their shoulders. "Feeling a little chilly there, rookie," Osgood said. I had been with the department for more than 3 months at this point, but seeing as I was still the newest guy on the payroll, I had not yet shirked that nickname. "A bit," I admitted, as I made my way to my locker and began stepping into my pants. "Maybe you can cuddle me when we get back, Ozzy." The guys laughed at that. Methods of tickling their funny bones had been some of the first things I had learned while working there. Once we all had our pants on, we grabbed the rest of our gear and began walking into the apparatus bay. Price, our driver, was already in the driver's seat of the rescue, his gear stashed in the cab where Fuller and I would be sitting. It always blew me away how quickly the guys managed to get ready during nighttime calls. The other guys all said that he didn't sleep when he worked overnights, and instead spent all night sitting in the bay, just waiting for the call that may not have even been coming. Fuller and I jumped into the cab, and Osgood climbed into the officer's seat up front. Price had the rescue peeling out of the bay before I even had my seatbelt on. "You got the address, right, Pierce?" Osgood asked our driver. Price nodded. "Yeah." "Do you recognize it?" "Yeah," the driver said again. "How could somebody possibly be trapped in there?" "I don't know," Price said, "but I don't like it." "What's so weird about that address?" I asked, confused by their conversation. "It's the address of that supermarket that shut down a while back," Fuller said. "Not just shut down," Osgood said. 10 months ago it was completely abandoned, out of the blue. It's been closed up ever since. There's no way somebody could be trapped in there." "Maybe some teenagers broke in or something," I said. "What do the notes say?" "Somebody called 911 and said they were stuck," Osgood explained. "They said, 'I can't get out,' a handful of times before they hung up the phone. Dispatch couldn't get any other details from the caller before the line got disconnected." "Maybe it's somebody pulling a prank," I offered. Fuller shook his head. "The notes say the call came from the landline in the office at the back of the store. Whoever made the call definitely made it from inside of the building." Price partially glanced in Osgood's direction while he drove. "So what's the plan then, officer?" Osgood, evidently not finding anything useful in the digital system while browsing through the tablet sitting in front of him on the dash, flipped through the binder of old pre-plans resting on his lap. When he found the page he was looking for, he took half a minute to skim its details. "We'll pull around the back and enter through the door in the rear," he eventually said. "You boys back there good to do some forcible entry?" "Yeah," Fuller said. He looked at me. "You take the Halligan, I'll take the axe." I nodded. "All right." Our conversation went dormant as we continued our way to the scene of the call. The frigidity from the outside world seeped into the cab as we drove, and I soon found myself shivering once again. Pulling on my turnout coat helped the cold some, but I still found myself wishing desperately that I could be back in that 100-degree bunk room. I silently resented whoever had called us out here on such a brutal winter night. We were almost certainly in the midst of being pranked by some kids. With any luck, we would arrive on scene and find them outside without ever having to enter the building, where we could quickly scold them for wasting emergency resources before returning back to the warmth and comfort of our station. We still had a long, cold night ahead of us, and I prayed to God that this would be our only call before my shift ended at 6 a.m. Osgood looked at Fuller and me in the rearview mirror. "Get your packs on now, boys," he said. "I want everyone on air. We ain't taking any chances with the air quality in this place, considering how long it's been sealed up." "You think it's going to be dangerous in there?" Fuller asked. I don't know, Osgood said, but it can't hurt to be safe. I resisted the urge to groan. Going on air meant we'd have to refill the cylinders when we got back. Of course, we could have just slapped fresh tanks into the SCBAs and left the used ones in the engine bay until morning, but if Osgood didn't insist on refilling them right away, then Price most certainly would. Our long night just got a few minutes longer. Osgood, Fuller, and I pulled our SCBAs over our shoulders and began tightening the straps. Price's pack was in a compartment just outside of the driver's side door, so he wouldn't be able to get it on until we arrived. None of us pulled our masks on yet. We knew we would likely have to force the rear door, and we didn't want to fog up the face coverings with the effort. We arrived at the strip mall where the abandoned supermarket lived, and had to drive the length of the shopping center before we could loop around to the rear side. Much like our destination, most, if not all, of the storefronts along the strip appeared to be devoid of business. It was difficult to make out any details in the dark, but from my spot in the cab, I could see that several storefronts lacked any kind of signage or branding out front, and those that did possess these things looked to be in varying states of disrepair. The road we drove on, as well as the parking lot on our left side, were riddled with potholes that were stared down upon by row after row of completely dead or rapidly flickering streetlights. The entire place felt incredibly eerie. It was as if we were driving straight into an apocalyptic hellscape that existed only a short few minutes from our fire station. Price pulled around back and we disembarked from the rescue. Osgood approached the rear of the supermarket, while Price pulled on his SCBA, and Fuller and I grabbed a set of irons from the rescue tools compartment on the truck. We had also each grabbed a flashlight from the cab of the apparatus before stepping outside. They hung from our sides by their straps and gently bumped against our hips as we approached the structure. The building's rear was constructed of old, faded, crumbling brick. A single loading dock, complete with a rusty iron shutter, was carved out of a section of the wall. A couple of yards from this dock was a small concrete platform, accessible by both a staircase and a ramp of the same material. A metal door existed at the top of the platform on the same wall as the shutter. Osgood was already standing outside of this door. Price was climbing the steps, while Fuller and I approached with our tools. I followed Fuller up the stairs to the platform and stepped forward, ready to shove the fork end of my Halligan into the door frame. Price stopped me by placing a firm hand on my shoulder before shaking his head. "Don't they teach you to try before you pry anymore, rookie?" he said. I frowned, taking a step back. "They do," I said sheepishly. "Sorry." Osgood laughed. "I guess you can't blame the guy for being a little eager." He wrapped a gloved hand around the door's handle, gripped the latch, and pulled. Much to my surprise, the door put up no resistance as it came away from its frame. Osgood noted my change in expression and grinned. "Don't look so surprised," he said. "The caller had to get into the building somehow, after all." "Yeah," I said. "I guess you're right." Osgood released his grip on the door and allowed it to fall back into place. "All right," he said. "Let's get on air and get this over with." We did as our officer instructed and pulled our masks onto our faces before we opened our air cylinders. I heard my SCBA's low pressure alarm ring briefly, indicating new airflow, before I attached my regulator to my mask. My next breath allowed a small blast of air to fill my mask and kiss my mouth and nose. When we were all ready and our breaths were coming in the form of slow, deliberate shallows, Osgood once again opened the door. Price stepped inside first, followed by Fuller and then me, with our officer bringing up the rear. The metal door groaned shut behind us, cutting off our portal to the outside world. All four of us clicked on our flashlights and began scanning our new environment with our beams. We found ourselves in a tight, dark hallway. Its walls were made of plain, off-white brick. Its floor a long stretch of worn, gray vinyl. Thousands of particles of what I, at the time, assumed to be dust floated and flitted through the air all around us. Fire department, Osgood yelled. His words sounded mechanical and distant through his SCBA's voice amplifier. When he received no response, he lowered his voice and directed it at us. The pre-plan says the office should be just up ahead. He led the way through the passage until we came upon a door on the wall to our left. It hung slightly ajar. The space beyond it was bathed in darkness. "This should be it," he said. Osgood slowly pushed the door open and allowed the flashlight attached to his turnout coat to illuminate the space beyond the threshold. He then took a cautious step inside. "Fire department," he called again. "Is anybody in here?" The rest of us stood in the hallway while our officer searched the office. All three of our pass systems, the blaring alarm on our SCBAs, that starts going off when we've been standing idle for too long, began to sound while we waited. We all needed to shake our SCBAs in order to silence the alarms, a process that became as second nature to us. After about 30 or 40 seconds in the office, Osgood came back out into the hall and closed the door shut behind him. "It's empty," he said, "but the phone is hanging off the receiver. It's got a dial tone." "So then somebody actually was here," I said. Fuller glanced down the hallway from which we had just come. But why would they need to call 911 when they were this close to the exit? Osgood shrugged. "Beats me, but I think somebody really did make that call from inside of this place." "Maybe it actually was a prank after all," I suggested. "Might have been," Price said. "Doesn't change the fact that we still have to search this whole place." "How is everyone doing on air?" Osgood asked. After confirming that we all had plenty of the stuff left, he went on. "Let's get this over with then. If we're quick about it, we can finish our search without having to go back for fresh cylinders." He led us down the hall until we reached another metal door at the far side. This barrier was different from the earlier one in that it was already partially ajar. A strange fact, considering that the door of the exact same type had closed on its own. This had evidently raised red flags for all four of us, because we immediately began to share glances with one another that we all knew indicated our concern, despite our faces being largely obscured by our masks. Osgood took a cautious step toward the door. He attempted to push it open, but he was immediately met with resistance. He then positioned his forearm against the barrier and gave it a forceful shove. The door still put up a fight, but with a little effort, he was able to create enough of an opening for us to fit through. With the space cleared, he took a step inside. The heavy metal door remained frozen in place even after he had left it behind. "Jesus Christ," we heard Osgood say from the other side of the threshold. Price quickly followed our officer through the doorway. Fuller went after him, and I brought up the rear. The space on the other side of the threshold was just as dark as the hallway had been, but our 4 flashlight beams did their best to illuminate our new world. More particles, thicker and more dense in their congregation, floated through the air all about us. They were so plentiful that our lights struggled to penetrate their haze, but we had just enough illumination to see that we were in a stockroom behind the main store. The walls, ceiling, floor, and shelves were all covered in a heavy layer of fungus. The mass looked to be one giant, perpetually growing organism that was constantly and frantically searching for more space to consume with its long, tendril-like roots. Looking at the ground, I could see that the door we had just come through had been forced to scrape along the fungus in order to come open. It was now held in place by the layer of fungus, which had glommed onto the bottom of the door with the buildup of the material that had been scraped away. "What the hell happened in here?" I said. "Good question," Osgood said. "I've been in some nasty places in my day, but none have ever been quite like this." "I think we're good to get out of here now," Fuller said. "Anybody who made their way in here would have likely been dead within minutes of breathing this air. This clearly isn't a rescue attempt anymore. If anything, it's a recovery." "All the more reason we need to press on," Price said. If somebody is still alive in here, then we need to pull them out ASAP. We're not properly equipped for this, Fuller said. We should be in hazmat suits in an environment like this, not turnout gear. Price shrugged. It don't make a difference anymore now, seeing as we're already in the thick of it. The price is right, Osgood said. We need to at least check this storage area. If we see no signs of anybody being in here, then we'll pull out, call in hazmat, and get deconned. But we need to make it quick. Fuller, you'll search to the left with me, while Price and the rookie go to the right. Fuller sighed to announce his frustration, but he offered no further protest. Osgood looked at Price. Radio us if you find anything. The driver nodded, and our two small groups went off into our separate directions. I didn't know what to say to my companion. He had always been the hardest person at my station to strike up a conversation with, so we remained silent as we conducted our search. We followed the mold-covered wall and weaved past shelves consumed by fungus. After rounding a corner, we came across a new metal door that was largely covered in the mass, and which was only identifiable by the handle that stuck out from the blanket of mold. I figure this door leads into the loading dock based on the pre-plan, Price said. He took hold of the handle and tried to open the door, but it remained firmly in place. Locked, but I doubt we'll be needing to go in there anyway. This door looks like it's been shut tight for a long time. Any potential victim in here won't have made it past this thing. We continued on for another minute or so before we spotted Osgood and Fuller. When we reached them, we found that they were waiting for us in front of a pair of swinging doors. One of the doors was slightly ajar. It was pushed away from us and stuck in place, just like how the metal door had been. You took so long that I was getting ready to radio you, Osgood said. We were looking at something back there, Price said. He glanced at the fungus-caked double doors. I'm guessing you two aren't the ones who pushed that open. Correct, our officer said. Which means whoever was in here went further into the store. Which means we need to keep going. I expected another protest from Fuller, but the man remained silent. After another quick oxygen check, during which we confirmed that we all had close to 3/4 of our cylinders left, we continued on into the store proper. Osgood pushed against the stuck door similarly to how he had the previous one, before leading the way into the space beyond it. I did not think that the mold spores, could have gotten any worse than they already were, but I was wrong. They were so thick and oppressive that I could hardly see beyond their dense curtain. The haze partially reflected my flashlight's beam back at me. It felt as if I was surrounded by the smoke of a burning building, or as if I had been swallowed by a heavy, ravenous hare. An even greater quantity of mold infested this new space. It teemed in the shadows beyond the reach of my flashlight and oozed out of a nearby frozen food chiller, making it look as if the waist-high container was overflowing with ice. Fire department, Osgood called again. Is anybody in here? His echoing voice was the only thing to respond to him. It's going to take us forever to search this place, Fuller said. Not if we move quickly, Osgood said. Same pairs as before. We'll go along the perimeter wall. If we haven't found anything by the time we meet up, then we'll begin searching the aisles one by one. Any questions? Nobody responded. Good. Now let's get this over with before we start getting low on air. Osgood and Fuller once again began moving left along the outer wall of the supermarket, while Price and I began moving to the right. I glanced in our companion's direction after taking only a few short steps, and was slightly alarmed to see the beams of their flashlight had already been completely consumed by the swirling mold spores. In a matter of seconds, it had become as if they had never existed at all. I walked with Price for another couple of minutes, while sweeping my flashlight with one hand and holding my Halligan with the other. I had yet to use the tool since entering the structure, and I considered offering it to my companion, who held nothing in his hands. He, like Osgood, had a flashlight attached to his coat, but I decided against it. I feared that the older man would think I was trying to pawn the Halligan off on him, and I did not want him believing me to be lazy. The silence in that space was almost overwhelming. It was as if the miasma of mold was muffling any and all ambient sound that would have come through, while somehow also creating a harsh noise that rattled my brain and threatened to destroy me from the inside out. The only sounds to break up the quiet were our soft footsteps against the fungus-covered floor, and the rhythm of our regular, mechanical breaths. I checked my cylinder's pressure again as we walked. It had not gone down much since the last time I had looked at it, but I was worried about suddenly going low on air in such an inhospitable environment. Of course I knew that it would activate a low pressure alarm before things got too dicey, but my paranoia told me that there was always the chance that the trigger would malfunction, and I would end up sucking my mask to my face before I knew it, suddenly forced to choose between imminent suffocation and breathing those toxic, putrid particles. Eventually the silence became unbearable, and at risk of wasting more oxygen I spoke. "What do you think caused this place to get like this?" At first Price didn't answer, and for a moment I thought that he intended not to. But then his robotic-sounding words escaped from his voice amplifier. "Don't know," he said. "I ain't ever seen anything like this." I glanced at some of the nearby freezers as we walked. Beyond the sheets of mold that fogged up the glass, I could see rows upon rows of once frozen meals still sitting in their spots on the shelves. "I guess they abandoned this place with everything still in it," I said. "Maybe that's what caused all this mold to grow." "This place has only been abandoned for less than a year," he said. "It shouldn't have gotten this bad in such a short time." I considered this for a moment. "Well, I guess it doesn't really matter what caused it to get like this," I said. "We're only here to find a potential victim, and that's all we have to worry about right now." Price nodded. "That's right. Leave the more complicated stuff in the higher pay grade where it belongs. Glad to see you're finally starting to get it, rookie." We kept going for another minute or so in silence. I continued to scan the way ahead of us with my flashlight beam, for all the good it did me in that dark, gloomy space. The spore haze seemed like it was growing thicker the more we walked, and the more dense it was, the more difficult it was for our beams to penetrate it. It was for this reason that, when I saw movement in one of the aisles from out of the corner of my vision, I didn't quite believe my own eyes. I came to an immediate stop and turned my flashlight down the aisle in question. Price, looking at me, did the same. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't know," I said, "but I thought I saw something move down there." "A person?" "I don't know," I said again. "It could have been. It also could have been my eyes playing tricks on me. It's hard to tell in here." "We should check it out regardless." I hesitated. "Are you sure we should head off the path? We told Ozzy and Fuller that we wouldn't start checking aisles until we met up again." "It could be the victim," Price said. He brought his hand up to the radio mic strapped to his collar. "Price to Ozzy." There was a pause before Osgood's crackly voice came over the speaker. "Go ahead, Price." "The rookie thought he saw something down one of the aisles. We're going to check it out. We'll let you know if we find anything." "Copy that," Osgood said. "Just be careful." Price nodded as if the man on the other side of the conversation could see the gesture. "Always." The two of us began creeping down the aisle. Without thinking, I looked up at the sign above my head as I passed it. We were walking into the canned goods aisle. Part of me wanted to chuckle. The items down that aisle would probably have still been edible, assuming one felt so inclined to dig them free of the layer of fungus that guarded them. I couldn't say the same for almost anything else in the store. "Fire department," Price called, speaking that familiar mantra. "Is anybody there?" Silence. Price and I got to the center of the aisle, right about to where I had seen the movement earlier. We searched around the place with our flashlights, but we turned up nothing. As far as either of us could tell, we were completely alone in that passage. surrounded on all sides by preserved foods covered in an ever-growing blanket of death. "See anything?" my companion asked. When I shook my head, he brought his hand up to his radio. "Price to Ozzy. Turns out it was a false alarm. We'll get back to the outer wall and continue our..." The sound of crashing glass behind us brought his words to an abrupt end. Price removed his hand from his radio as he and I turned to look in the direction from which we had just come. On the floor a few yards away lay what I could just barely make out to be a shattered jar, its contents spilling out onto the floor and mixing with the mold that lived there. "You alright, Price?" Osgood said over the radio. My companion ignored the question. Instead, he and I shared a brief glance before we took a cautious step towards the ruined jar. "Hello?" Price said. "Is somebody there?" His words were replaced by a sudden shout as his feet were pulled out from under him, and he landed on his back with a terrible crash. Price began sliding along the moldy floor in the direction that we had just been facing. His yells were mangled by the harsh screech of his SCBA scraping along beneath his back. I rushed through the darkness after my taken companion, but he was moving far too quickly for me to keep up with him. He would have soon been lost to the shadows, but he managed to reach out and grab onto a shelf divider. As he was pulled past it, the thing dragging him continued in its effort, but he managed to hold on long enough for me to reach his side. Wrapped around his leg was a long, squirming tendril that stretched out into the shadows beyond where my flashlight beam could see. It fought desperately to rip Price free of his anchor, which he held on to for dear life, dropping my flashlight and allowing it to come to a rest at the end of its strap at my side. I took my Halligan into both hands and lifted it up to my head before bringing the forked end down upon the angry tendril. Matter was severed from matter, as both ends of the tentacle, now free of each other, writhed on their own. The end wrapped around Price's leg released its grip as it began to violently contort on the ground. The longer section quickly darted away from the blow and disappeared into the darkness. I took my Halligan into one hand and used the other to grab Price by the arm. He desperately backed away from the twisting mass as I helped him to his feet. After taking a few minutes to catch our breath, we cautiously approached Price's attacker. It looked to me, in the dim light of my flashlight's beam, to be a tendril of moldy, twisting flesh, an unholy union of fungus and meat. It continued to squirm on the floor, but without its main body to support it, its efforts were ineffective. "What the hell is it?" I asked. "I don't know," Price said out of breath. "But we need to get out of here." I noticed a sudden hissing noise, which prompted me to lean towards Price. My stomach sank as I realized that the sound was his quickly depleting air source. "I think your cylinder ruptured when that thing attacked you," I said. "We need to get you outside." "Not until we find the others," Price said. "We can both go off of your cylinder for a bit if we need to." He quickly changed a knob on his radio. "I'm going to contact dispatch. See if you can get a hold of Ozzy and Fuller." As he began his transition to the outside world, I brought my hand to my own radio mic and pressed the button to begin my transmission. "This is Search Team 2 to Search Team 1, I said. A few moments of silence passed, during which I did not receive the go-ahead to speak. "Come in, Ozzy. Are you there?" I was met with further silence. "Ozman, Fuller, are either of you there?" "I can't get in touch with dispatch," Price said. "Something must be blocking the signal. No good on reaching the others either," I said. "Damn it," he said. "Then we're just going to have to..." A horrible screeching wail suddenly came blaring through both of our radios. It was so loud that we could hear the original sound coming from the other side of the building. The radio was unnecessary to broadcast that cry of primal, desperate distress. "That sounded like Fuller," Price said as we both looked in the direction of the scream. He had hardly finished his sentence before the blaring alarm of a pass device shattered the atmosphere all around us. Price did not even glance my way before he took off in the direction of the shrill noise. I offered one final glance at the still squirming tendril of flesh before rushing after him. I squared up next to my companion, and together we sprinted out of our aisle and toward the source of the commotion. The pass alarm grew in volume and intensity as we ran, until it finally reached its final, ear-splitting evolution. We rounded a corner and soon found ourselves in the midst of its mighty, overwhelming song. The sound was coming from the space that had once served as the store's meat department, a gigantic mass of writhing, undulating, mold-infused meat grew from the remnants of the department's display case, which had long since ruptured from the pressure created by the abomination that we now gazed upon. The mycotic mound of once flesh squirmed and lurched as its Stygian body continued to intrude from the space beyond the display. We quickly spotted the source of the pass alarm, the meaty silhouette of one of our companions. It would turn out to be Osgood, stood completely still as the wall of flesh consumed the rest of his body. His pass alarm became muffled as the mass closed around any remaining apertures through which the sound could escape. The screaming SCBA's flashing orange lights continued to gleam through the coffin of carrion before they too were completely ingested. What looked to be the outlines of several arms, legs, and even faces stretched out from the squirming heap of meat. The muted, agonized groans of our swallowed companion joined a chorus of indistinct voices that called out from the tumulus of wiggling death. "I can't get out," I thought I heard one of the voices say. I also thought I heard another one say the word "stuck," but I couldn't be certain. The words sounded more like the primal cries of panicked animals than the intelligent sentences of human beings. "Mother God," Price muttered next to me. Fuller stood at the very limits of this advancing mass. Several fleshy tendrils were wrapped around his legs and hips and torso, and pulled at him as he desperately swung at his attackers with his axe. I rushed to Fuller's side and began digging at the tendrils with my Halligan. He managed to sever one of the muscly vines as I worked, but two more quickly took its place. They managed to easily dodge his incoming blows. One latched itself around his neck while the other splashed against his mask. The mask shattered with enough force to disconnect his regulator. I only heard his scream for a brief moment before the mass of fungus and meat filled his mouth and nose and completely consumed his face. I instinctively tried to step away from the mound of twisting tissue, but I was stopped when one of the fungal tendrils lashed out and grabbed onto my boot. Price rushed forward and grabbed the axe from Fuller's hand. Moments before the flesh had fully consumed its victim, he brought the axe down on the matter, creeping its way up my boot. I was able to pull my foot away from the larger mass and managed to shake away any meat that remained there, setting myself free. "Come on," Price said. He turned and ran away from the growing wall of carrion without looking to see if I was following after him. Needless to say that I was. I also did not turn back to offer our last companion a final glance, for fear of losing all hope at the sight of the monstrous formation of meat that so desperately sought to add us to its ranks. We cut through the nearest aisle in our desperate fight toward our exit. Tendrils of matter rushed toward us as we fled. Each of us swung our respective tools turned weapons at our encroaching foes. Fungal flesh splattered against the shelves of either side of us. We did not stop to admire the works of art that we left behind. Soon our exit came into view. I was filled with a burst of hope that was quickly dashed into oblivion when I suddenly noticed that I was running by myself. I turned back around and spotted Price crouched on the floor a few yards back. He desperately hacked and sucked at a regulator that was no longer providing him with any oxygen. In my frantic effort to escape, I had not noticed the sound of his low air alarm. I did not know how long he had struggled on while fighting against his need to breathe. A tentacle exploded out from the darkness and wrapped around the arm holding his axe. I took a step toward him, but he used his free hand to rip his suffocating regulator free of his mask. "Go," he shouted as spores filled his lungs. 2 more tendrils grabbed hold of him and began pulling him deeper into the shadows. He did not scream even as they found the new opening in his mask and made themselves at home. I turned and sprinted away from my companion. It seemed to take me hours to reach the swinging doors that led into the storage area, but at long last I finally stepped beyond the threshold. I continued to run, my breath coming in the form of heavy, mechanical gasps as I reached the partially open door that led into the back hallway. I did not think that I would find the strength to force my heavy, sweating body through the tight aperture, but I somehow managed to make it to the other side. The way outside was now in sight. All I had to do was make it to the other side of that impossibly long hallway. Something latched onto my back, halting my progress. My next step grew heavier, as did my next, until I could no longer move forward. Looking over my shoulder, I saw multiple tendrils latched onto the back of my SCBA. I desperately began tearing at my air pack straps, while silently cursing the fact that the thing was so thoroughly secured to my body. Soon everything was pulled loose, and all that remained was one strap pulled over my shoulder. I took one final gasp of air from my regulator before I tore it from my mask, and brought the bottom of my hood up to cover the new opening. I then released the SCBA strap from my shoulder. The air pack fell backwards into the tendrils that so desperately pulled against it. In the same moment, I managed to sprint away from the lost air source, and rushed the rest of the way toward my exit. My lungs burned as I tore open the metal door standing between me and the outside world. I scrambled onto the cement platform, and quickly slammed the door behind me. It wasn't until I was down the stairs and halfway to the rescue before I finally pulled my hood away and took a huge, gasping breath. Fresh air had never tasted so good before, but I did not have time to enjoy it. I rushed to the rescue, climbed into the officer's seat, and reached for the radio attached to the center console, but my hand did not even make it halfway to its destination before the speaker came to life with the anguished, tortured wails of my 3 lost companions.